My name is Mike Petrilli. I'm a vice president at the Thomas B. Fordham Institute, which is right here in Washington, D.C. I mean, it's always strange having a conference in your own hometown, because everybody else is traveling and staying in the nice Mandarin. I changed a dirty diaper this morning before coming here, so this is, yes, I just want to get, all right. I want to get the women in the group on my side. Good, excellent. I'm very excited about this panel because we're going to get to hear some great stories of some very interesting legislation moving through some state houses, also some very intriguing research about a topic that is at the center of everything we're talking about in reform right now. You cannot get away from this issue of teacher quality, of teacher tenure, of teacher evaluation, of merit pay. It's integral to everything that we're doing in many respects. If you believe in accountability, for example, you believe standards-based reform and testing and accountability, we've been at this now for almost 2 decades, you will probably come to the conclusion eventually that accountability is not real unless we can, at the end of the day, take people who are not doing what they need to be doing in the classroom and help them find a different line of work. And yet we've talked about how No Child Left Behind brought an era of accountability. Well, it labeled schools as bad schools, and it had interventions in schools, but it did not, at the end of the day, say that if an individual teacher was not doing what she needed to do, that she could be removed. If you're talking about professionalizing the teaching profession, you want to think about going towards performance pay. Obviously, you need some way to identify the most effective teachers, a way that people feel comfortable and confident in. So this gets to these pieces. If you want to find ways to recruit talented new people into the profession, you might struggle if they find that they are going to come into a school where there may be people on the staff who are not doing what they need to do and yet are there year after year after year, right? And if you have a huge budget gap, which I know many of you do, almost all of you do, and you want to find smart ways to cut spending in ways that protect kids and that make these tough choices, you want to be able to lay off ineffective teachers, for example, before you just lay off your most junior teachers, regardless of effectiveness. But all of this stuff can't be done unless we figure out some of these fundamental building blocks. How do we identify effective teachers? How do we reward them? What do we do about tenure? What do we do about seniority? And these are issues that, by and large, are getting played out at the state level. So I'm very excited to hear today. We've got some great panelists. We're going to start with Senator Mike Johnston from Colorado, who was able to push through what most people probably see as the most far-reaching bill this year. That was probably the biggest success that Race to the Top had, if you can claim that it was related to Race to the Top. And I think you would say that certainly helped, even though Colorado, in the end, was not rewarded for its excellent work, which is a shame and a real travesty, and tells you a little bit about how this town works. Then we're going to hear from Senator John Thrasher from the Florida Senate, which also pushed through a very far-reaching teacher quality bill, one that then fell on the shores of politics when it was vetoed by your current governor. And we'll hear about prospects going forward next year. And then we're going to hear about a fascinating study by Dr. Jeanette Taylor from Florida State University. Dr. Taylor has the difficult role, but I'm glad that she has this role. And the role is to raise some questions and to be skeptical. I think some of the study findings that she's going to present are going to raise some questions about whether or not we know how to do this, identifying effective teachers, whether or not the value-added stuff is the right way to go. So it should be a great panel. At the very least, I want to keep you, want to make sure that it's provocative, it keeps you on your toes, and so forth. So we're not going to do traditional presentations per se, although Dr. Taylor is going to present her study in a little bit. But I want to start off by asking Senator Johnston, Mike, tell us about the policy substance of what you guys got through in Colorado. Tell us very quickly, what was in that teacher quality bill? And then we'll hear the same from Senator Thrasher. Go ahead.
Great. Well, thank you all. It's great to be here. I did not change any dirty diapers this morning, but I will be changing many of them the next 3 days as penance for being in the Mandarin Hotel last night. So it sort of comes out in the wash, I think. I have twin 3-year-olds.
Oh, by the way, it does not come out in the wash. I don't know what are you talking about?
I have twin 3-year-olds, so I'm also very excited to hear from Dr. Taylor about all the things I should be doing better in parenting of them. That's probably part of the problem. So delighted to talk policy. We'll give you a quick overview of our bill, and my co-sponsor is here in the crowd, Senator Nancy Spence, who's here. Senator Spence, can you wave to everybody? So she is my co-conspirator on this, and also Randy DeHoff, member of our state board, who unanimously supported the bill. So we'll talk more about the politics of this, but the coalition was incredible, including great leadership from these two folks. And Christine Scanlon, who is our House sponsor, is here somewhere. If you see her, you should give her a hug, because she got filibustered by her own party to get this bill passed on the House side. So a long story there. But the policy is this. We started from the basic research component that you all know, which is we now know far and away single most important variable affecting student performance is teacher effectiveness. And the second most important is principal effectiveness. And so if you want to close a gap as big as the ones that we care about, you want to make sure every kid's ready for college and a career, you want to close achievement gaps, you have to deal with the biggest lever you have, and that's teacher and principal quality. So 4 major components of the bill, and Senator Spence and I's belief was if you're going to do this, you might as well do it in a comprehensive way and not just attack one part of the human capital system, but try to overhaul the entire way that we do business. And so we started by saying 50% of all teacher evaluations would be linked to demonstrated student growth. That's in all subject areas and all content levels, and all grade levels. We also said that 50% of a principal's evaluation would be linked to student growth and would also be linked to the percentage of effective teachers on staff or the percentage of teachers that are improving in their effectiveness. Really important here that you provide a natural incentive for principals to actually do the work of supporting and developing teachers to become great. And then we figured once we build an evaluation that has these components, it's important that these evaluations mean something and actually matter. Most people in our state agreed the evaluation system as it currently stood was broken. And so we thought one way to make it matter is any of the privileges that one gets in the profession ought to be linked to effectiveness on these metrics. So we said that we believe that the structure of tenure was one that could be preserved if its basic promise was you earn certain job protections if you demonstrate yourself to be a great performer consistently over time. So our policy is now in the state of Colorado, to earn non-probationary status, you have to have 3 consecutive years of effective performance. 3 consecutive years. So if you have 2 good years and then 1 bad year, it would take you 3 new years again, which would mean 6 years total. If you have, like me, your first year you're terrible, then you get better. You could get it in 4 years or 5 years, it depends. But the idea is you will have had consistent, effective performance over time to earn those protections. And then to keep those protections, you also have to continue to perform effectively. So if at any time in your career you have 2 years of ineffective performance, you lose those job protections. And every single teacher in the state is under that provision. No one is grandfathered in. So if you are currently have been teaching 25 years in the state of Colorado, when this full bill takes effect in 2013, you'll have 2 years of ineffective performance, you'd lose job protections. We also said that we think one of the benefits of effectiveness is to identify really high performers and be able to learn from their practice. And so we set up a provision to establish career ladders where highly effective teachers and highly effective principals can apply through the state to earn additional pay for additional responsibilities to document and share their practices online, to become master teachers where novice teachers could come and observe you in your classroom. So again, we're providing incentives for the very best teachers to stay in the teaching profession, rather than financial incentives for them to leave it. That's a bit of a challenge to fund right now. That was a hard part of our race to top loss, was that specific component. The final 2 are, we did say, we also changed the reduction in force policy. So we used to have a state statute, like many states had, that said seniority was the way you determine making reductions in force when a district or a school faces reductions. I think it's pretty clear if you're making decisions in the best interest of kids, you want to keep your best players on the floor, right? There is no successful professional sports team in America that would say, sorry, LeBron James, you only have 3 years of experience, we got to cut you because we have a guy with 18 years of experience we need to keep on the roster. I think that what we wanted to do is first say, you keep your most effective performers, so if you're a second-year teacher that's highly effective and a 6th-year teacher that's ineffective, you would keep the 2nd year, release the 6th year. And then we became the first state to put in place a statewide ban on what people call the dance of the lemons, or the practice of forced placement, which is if you have a teacher that is tenured and for some reason is out on the open market, loses a position through closure or consolidation or reduction in a building or whatever it might be, and we know those teachers are disproportionately placed in low-income schools and schools with predominantly kids of color. I represent one of the poorest districts in the state, and so we know that is a huge equity issue. And so now no teacher in the state of Colorado can be hired other than through affirmative hiring by the principal. We call it school-based hiring or mutual consent. And so if a teacher is without a position, they have 1 year at the most to, like anyone else, compete on the open market to earn a position. And if they get hired by a principal of a school, then they have a new permanent placement. If they don't get hired after that year, then they're dropped from the district payroll. They're on an unpaid leave. If they ever get rehired, they can return back with their years of experience, but they're not guaranteed a position unless they earn one. So that was, I talked quickly because I know I had a short amount of time, but that's the basic policy framework.
All right, so let's see. So you changed teacher evaluation. You changed the way tenure works. You had this new program for high performers. You got rid of last hired, first fired, and you had a statewide ban on Dance of the Lemons. Is that all you got done, Mike? Is that all you can do? What is that? Slackers. No. Now you understand why Colorado did not get this race to the top, huh? Good grief. You call that now. All right, so let me understand. Were these the proposals, or is this the way the bill actually came out? I mean, so for example, 50% based on student learning, is that still, that's the way the bill came out in the end?
That's still all in there. In the original proposal, the only thing we lost was I had principals at 67% of student growth, and we got that beat back to 50, but everything else is as proposed and as passed.
Okay, and when you do things like, say, we're going to get rid of last hired, first fired, or we're going to get rid of the Dance of the Lemons, I mean, to what degree does that supersede whatever local school districts negotiate with their own unions? Does this mean it is now illegal to put anything different in those local contracts?
It does for reduction in force. What we stayed silent on was reduction in building, and that was actually because superintendents and school boards asked us to, because most districts negotiate their own reduction in building policy, and so if you have a high school and they decide to cut 1 FTE of math and add 1 FTE of science, they normally can make those reductions at the school level however they want, which means they can also bargain those. But this does trump any local bargaining on reduction in force. But the key is, I mean, those were state statutes before. So it wasn't like there was this new state overreach into local control. Previously, there was a state statute that required every single district in Colorado to release by seniority all the way up. And same with the evaluation system. Tenure was a state law that said every teacher on the first day of their 4th year, if they are still in school and still breathing, they have tenure protections. And so those were existing state statutes that we changed. They were not new overreach of state power. And
that's a really important point for state policymakers here. A lot of people will complain about, oh, there's collective bargaining agreements that protect tenure. Well, it turns out in every single state, tenure is something granted at the state level. Most states have something around teacher evaluation in state law and regulation. You've got, many states have statewide salary schedules. So, I mean, a lot of this stuff is happening at the state level, and there are definitely levers to pull there.
The one part of that where we had to finesse a little bit was in Colorado, all of the salary schedules are by district. So those are locally bargained. And so what we did is our proposed career ladder proposal has it set up such that it's an independent contract between a teacher and the state Department of Education for additional pay, for additional responsibilities. So it's not in addition to their salary schedule. It's not added on to the local schedule. They can still do their own pay for performance systems at the district level. They can do their own salary schedules. We're doing a separate and independent contract directly through the state, which doesn't make it a local control issue.
Okay, Senator Thrasher, try to top that. Let's hear. And I think you almost can. So another state Senate Bill 6, a lot of attention this past year. Tell us what was in that law, in that bill.
Happy to. First of all, I didn't change any diapers this morning. A little north of that. But I did get a cold from one of my grandchildren this weekend, this past weekend. So in any event, good to be here. Senator, congratulations on a great job, and I'm sure we can learn a lot from what you did. Our bill was based on a premise, and you've heard a lot of the discussion of that premise here this morning at this meeting, that it was a comprehensive attempt to reform really instructional quality in the classroom to help students and to help students succeed. It was a recognition, frankly, our bill was that much of the current system is antiquated, is broken, or designed to benefit adults and not the kids in the system. And so we primarily addressed 4 major areas: preparation, evaluation, employment, and compensation. And basically, and very briefly, the preparation, we had a question out there today, I think in the luncheon, or maybe it was this morning, I'm not sure, about the linkage between preparing folks who are in education schools and linking that preparation to how they succeed in the classroom. And so we had a piece in there that did that and addressed some of those issues, because we found, based on the testimony that we heard, there was clearly a gap between that kind of preparation and what actually happened later on in the classroom. So we created some systems that would be primarily done through the Department of Education and the local school districts to provide some evidence, if you will, that students that were graduating from college were actually going into a classroom and that learning gains as measured by state assessments were actually taking place. We think that was a good start because there's a lot of work to be done, I think, in preparing our teachers who are in our colleges of education to better perform in the classroom. And then evaluation. We had testimony from the Department of Education that 99% of our teachers were rated or evaluated satisfactory, 99%. In fact, we have one school in which every single 100% of the teachers were rated satisfactory, and the reading proficiency of that particular school, it was a high school, was probably on the 3rd grade level. And it was a terrible indictment of what was going on, and it clearly indicated to us that there was a gap between the current evaluation system and what really needed to be there. And so we addressed that in the bill, and and as Mike said, there are a lot of things out there that our bill encompassed that really were already kind of on the books, the statutes of the state of Florida, but we really weren't enforcing or we really weren't applying in a provocative or efficient way. And so we began to enforce, or at least our bill would have enforced in the current law, the requirement that school districts develop local assessments to evaluate teachers based upon student performance. And then we went on to say that specified that more than 50% or more of the classroom teacher's performance or evaluation would be based upon learning gains of the students assigned to that particular teacher. That was obviously an incredible change in anything that we'd ever done in our state, and it, in essence, caused part of the uproar. The whole bill caused an uproar, but eventually, I think we'll get there. We also established an appraisal system that differentiated between satisfactory and unsatisfactory, which is our current system, and basically made it highly effective needs improvement, or unsatisfactory, which gives the administrators, we think, the power to do what they need to do when they have unsatisfactory performance in the classroom. And then the employment issue. Unions, in my opinion, talked a little bit about that at the lunch gathering. There was a soft conversation about unions, I think, from my perspective anyway. Unions love tenure. They love it. They love it because I think it makes it almost virtually impossible to terminate a teacher for poor performance without spending a great deal of money and through litigation and all the administrative things they do. And I personally believe, after hearing the testimony and looking at the system for a long time, that tenure is designed to protect mediocrity. And a poor performing teacher can cause, as we all know, and I think anybody understands the data, a lot of harm in 1 year. Because if you lose that 1 year of learning gains, as Governor Bush says, a year's worth of time and a year's knowledge, it's going to be destructive to that kid or that student. And so our bill basically was the elimination of tenure for new teachers. The teachers would be hired in the school district's discretion on the basis of annual contracts. Poor performing teachers based upon the evaluation system and their union accomplices will no longer be able to hide behind tenure. We're going to do it again this year, I promise you. Compensation, the problem, while tenure, again, in my opinion, protects mediocrity, the current compensation system, frankly, rewards it. And I know you all heard the discussion. Teachers come in, they're put on the step system, and maybe in 20 years they earn a decent salary. Whereas if in our system they were rewarded based upon performance, that we think so many of them are doing well and working hard, that their compensation could certainly go up at a much higher rate. So our bill effectively did that, and I think, again, that's a good provision, and it's one in which everybody seems to be talking about around the country now, that we ought to pay people who are in the classroom, who are doing the work, and are making a difference in the lives of students. And if we do that, I think you begin to attract the kinds of folks that we talked about, the kinds of folks that, you know, that we want in the teaching profession. But part of that is like anything else. You got to compensate them well, and we have a system that simply doesn't do that in the present. So it did not. That's what that bill, the basic 4 elements of the bill. As Mike said, our bill was vetoed. It passed both the House and Senate by fairly decent margins, not overwhelming margins, I think. But by fairly decent margins. I think we had, in the Senate, we have 40 members of the Senate. House has 120 members. I think there may have been a total of 3 Democrats that voted for the bill. And that gets to my good friend Jeb Bush's issue about this being a bipartisan thing and everybody kumbaya-ing. Well, on this kind of stuff right now, in a state like ours anyway, it ain't much to do about kumbaya. If you believe in the policy, if you believe that it's the right thing to do, then you've got to use a little effort to get it done. And part of the argument against our bill was that we used too much of that effort, that I perhaps was a strong arm, and you know, I got all kind of accusations about stuff I did. Some of my friends from Florida back there, and they'll say, well, you know, the argument that we basically had against the bill, the biggest argument, was process. Of course, if we'd have done it on process and done it, you know, had multiple meetings and all that, and then we'd have gotten into substance. But there is no way in our state right now that the dadgum unions are going to agree with this kind of stuff. And so you either bring them to the table and tell them what you're going to do, or you run over them. And I think we're at a point where that discussion in there ended, that's what a lot of people feel like. I feel that way. I'm willing to sit down with them and listen to them, but I'm not willing to believe, to compromise the principles that I believe in that are necessary to take this issue to the next level. And it takes leadership, as was discussed again in there. It takes a lot of leadership. You know, and politically, you have to have generally you have to have a governor who believes in what you're doing. You have to have a speaker or a Senate president that understands the importance of it. And that's why these meetings and the growth of this education foundation and the outreach of it, I think, is becoming really one of the drivers in our country for reform in education. And I don't want to put too many plugs in for my good friend Governor Bush, but I love him like a brother. He's done an incredible job of moving this issue along, and I'm so proud of what he's accomplished. And I owe it to him to go back this next session and make sure that the elements of Senate Bill 6 are passed. We have a governor now that just got elected that believes in what we are doing and is ready to sign the bill when it gets to his desk. So,
okay, great. Well, we will get more into the politics in a couple minutes. I want to hear the stories on both sides in more detail. This Colorado story, by the way, particularly interesting because Senator Mike Johnston admitted, you're a Democrat. Yes, it's true. Mike is very involved with the Democrats for Education Reform, and at least in Colorado.
My name is Mike Johnston. I'm a Democrat.
You know, at most education conferences, I have to say that usually, you know, I have to hide the fact, well, I was in the Bush administration. Yes, a little different here. Okay. Now, both bills, when you get to the evaluation piece and say, okay, 50% has to do with student learning, right? And I assume that means test scores and grades and subjects where there are tests, other things where there's not. Is that the basic idea? All right, so all of this assumes that teachers, while it's not fair to hold them accountable for, say, the just level test scores of their kids, it is fair to hold them accountable for the gains that their kids make over time. That if you're unlucky to get a tough group of kids or kids who are way behind, but you can bring them up over the course of the year, that's a fair way to hold teachers accountable, to measure their effectiveness. Not perfect, but pretty fair. Is that right? Okay, so now we want to hear from Jeanette, who's going to present some very interesting research that she did on twins and using a study of twins to look at teacher quality and how much of that is under the control of a teacher. Well, something like that. I didn't quite get that right. Jeanette, take it away.
Okay, I have slides, so I'm going to go ahead and do that. I don't have a pointer, though, so if I just... I was asked to talk about a study that we published earlier this year on teacher quality and genetic influence on reading. And I'm the odd man out, I think, on the panel, as obvious. I'm an academic. I work at a university. And I study reading from a twin perspective, and I'm going to talk about genetics. From the informal conversations I've had at breakfast and lunch, I think my goal here is in part just to plant some seeds about individual differences in kids and the things that affect those differences that maybe some of you didn't realize, and the title's already giving it away. So why do children differ in reading achievement? Anybody who's been in front of a classroom, whether it's kindergartners or college students like me, knows that kids don't score the same in a classroom on achievement. They have the same teacher, but they don't get the same scores. They get different scores. So they differ in ways that are important when they come into the classroom. So what I want you to sort of think about is that children are going to enter the classroom with differences in a number of factors, some of which teachers influence and some of which they can't. So motivation, I think teachers probably could influence that, and we hope that they do. But psychopathology, if a kid has ADHD or is depressed or is anxious, that's not something the teacher can fix. Home environment and genes. So kids in a classroom differ on lots of things, down from biology all the way through environmental factors. Most education research is done with unrelated kids, which means it ignores those genetic factors. And that's one of the things we're interested in getting at this question of why children differ in reading achievement. So if reading or looking at unrelated kids isn't going to help you get at genes, what does? You have to look at special groups of kids, as Senator Johnston's already alluded to. You have to look at twins. So if you look at the different types of twins that we have in the world and you put them into a study, you can actually learn something about causal influences on things like reading and even other kinds of things that have been studied. So how do we do that? Well, we compared types of twins. And we've got identical twins who share 100% of their genes. So football fans will recognize the pair there. And this is an important factor about identical twins. So we need a comparison group, and for that comparison, we use fraternal twins. Because like identical twins, they're matched for age in the home, and they share a home, if you use twins reared together. But they share only 50% of their genes. And so the difference here in the amount of shared genetics is what's key. The identical twins share all of their genes. They have all the copies are the same. Whereas fraternal twins are just like full siblings, and they share only about 50% of their genes. So this differential in the amount of shared genetic material is what allows us to use twins in comparison to infer something about genetics. That's how we're going to get at that. Okay? So how do we make these inferences about etiology or causality? Well, you compare the similarity within pairs. So you'd look at the I'm using my science language, the identical twins and you look within the pairs of identical twins and how similar are they within pairs. And then you compare that to how similar the fraternal twins are within pairs. If your identical twins are more similar within pair than the fraternal twins, we go back to that difference that's there, the genetic difference. Remember, they're raised in the same homes, they're sharing that environment, so that's not different about them. What's different is how much genes they share. Identicals have more. And so we infer genetic influence there. But if the similarity among identical twins is about the same as the similarity level of fraternal twins, that is, there's not this big difference, then we think what's happening there is the influence of what's called shared environment. It's the things that are common to people who live together that might influence that behavior. So if we think about reading, think about family economic status, neighborhood that you live in. That's something you share when you live with somebody. Number of books in the home, okay? That's gonna be the same for those twins in that home. And so that might be a factor that's there. And it would make the two types of twins equally similar, okay? The identicals wouldn't have an advantage from genes. And then finally, in terms of differences between people who are genetically related, it explains why identical twins aren't exactly identical. They look alike to us, but when you study them, you realize there's a lot of differences. And for those of you who might have taught them or know them, you know that there's those differences. So any unique environmental events that we've had in our lives that make us different from somebody that we share genes with is another form of etiological influence. So it's these three things that we estimate with our twin study, and it becomes important here. So let me give you just an overview of the research on twins that have been done in not just the United States, in other countries. So if you read across the first three columns, those numbers are going to add up to 1. So what we're saying is you can account for 100% of the variability in reading. Whatever that variance figure is, whatever that number may be, you can account for 100% of that by using these twins and making these comparisons. So what we see is that genes are accounting across studies for a large majority of the differences between kids. The first two lines are from our study in Florida. We've got a big Florida twin study. The second group is from Colorado. There's a huge group there led by Dick Olson at University of Colorado. There's an Australian group, a Scandinavian group. The TED study is from Great Britain. It's huge. It's epidemiological. And then there's a group from Ohio. So if you take the average of that green column, what you get is a mean genetic influence of 0.68. And in real terms, what that means is that 68% of the differences in scores among children owe to the differences that they have in their genes. Just the version of the copies of the genes that they have are influencing that in some way. Okay. So our Florida Twin Project on reading is what I'm going to get to next. It's part of the Florida Center for Reading Research. And it's a project that is part of a center grant that's funded through the National Institutes of Health. And for our study, we looked at a measure of reading at the end of first and second grade. That's when reading really comes online. The kids can actually do reading tasks. They're not the pre-reading skills, but the actual word reading. And we use an oral reading fluency test in Florida. It's given a few times a year to track kids and how well they're doing. And this is a measure that the child reads for a minute. How many words do they get right? So it's a fluency measure. We use the twin data that we have from the state to estimate those genetic influences. And then we have the data on the classmates of the twins. So it's not based on the twins themselves, but on their classmates. That's where we estimate teacher quality, is from those separate data. So I've got teacher quality in quotation marks. In part, this was alluded to in the morning session on teacher quality by Jason, who talked about this being a very complex metric. And so it's in quotations because there's a lot of things that might go into this. We make some inferences about teacher quality and that it reflects teacher quality. So we use a value-added score, and that was discussed this morning in a separate session if you saw it. What you do with that score is you predict the end-of-year score. For us, it's ORF, this reading fluency, while controlling for the beginning of the year score. So you're controlling for what the student comes into the classroom with. How much growth is there? You do that across all the students in the class, all the teachers that you have. So as was alluded to this morning, it's a kind of a big statistical thing. But it's a nice statistical method because it gets at this change. So low scores on this for a teacher would reflect small class level gains. That teacher's class is not coming up very much from beginning to end of class. So that's maybe a lower teacher quality. High scores then are going to reflect big gains over the course of the year. And so we might call that higher teacher quality. Okay, so this is what these value-added scores refer to. And this is the only data that we had available. All we had were achievement scores on students in Florida. So we don't have anything else on teachers, and that's an important caveat. So we're making an inference that just those scores alone are reflecting teacher quality. But really, it's maybe classroom quality, school quality, all those things are tied into the kids' gains over the course of the year. So let me walk through the figure and say what the basic finding that we had was, which is I talked about the different types of influences. We've got genetic influence in the solid line. We've got shared environment, those things that are shared amongst family members. And then we've got unique environment, those individual differences, unique events that happen to people. Variability, that is the amount of variance in reading scores accounted for by each of those things, is plotted on the y-axis. On the x-axis below, we've got 0 at average. That's average teacher quality. That was middle of the road. Mean gain was just middle of the road. Going up to +2, that's 2 standard deviations above the mean. That's a really, really high quality teacher. Down to -2, that's really low teacher quality. Two standard deviations below the mean. What we see is that the 2 types of environmental variance stay the same over levels of teacher quality. What changes is the genetic variance. So what's happening is that at high levels of teacher quality, the variability in reading scores is accounted for more by genetics than when you're in low quality teacher environments. Okay, so it's the genetic piece that's different across levels of teacher quality. So what does that mean? Well, it's consistent with this thing called the bioecological model. How do we understand the interaction between genes and environment? Genetic influences, and this model says that genetic influences are realized to their potential in more supportive environments. In other words, if you give a good environment, whatever potential there might be in genetics can be realized. That's what this model says. And our data suggests that. The figure before just showed that. At the high end of teacher quality, again, defined with just these achievement scores, that lets genetic influences bloom. That any potential that might be there may get realized more so in a higher teacher quality environment. Low teacher qualities, on the other hand, seem to constrict or constrain those genetic influences, and that might leave potential on the table, unused. So what I think our study really suggests is that teachers do matter. That was one of our interests. In terms of these individual differences in reading, do teachers matter? I think the data are pretty clear, but so do genes. And so that's one of the messages I'm hoping people will hear, that there's other factors that are individual differences factors. And in fact, in our study, it interacts. The quality of the teacher interacts with the genetics of the child in terms of explaining these individual differences. So.
Wow. Does that feel good to have your brain working like that again, huh? Great. Makes me want to go back to college. This is, okay, so let's try to unpack this a little bit more.
No, that's variance level.
All right, so let's try to unpack this a little bit more. So what you're saying, at the beginning I said, okay, the assumptions in a lot of these policies is that it is fair to look at growth over time because you're holding, you're already taking into account that some teachers are going to have kids who are lower achieving coming in.
Right.
Now, are you saying that even when you're just looking at gains, that's going to be influenced by the genetic ability of the kid coming in?
Right. So the idea, I think, is that these teacher value added scores are controversial for a reason, in part because it's not clear if you use a score alone on an achievement test, what goes into that score? What goes into that gain? Is it just what the teacher brings to the classroom? Or is it the classroom? Is it the kid that the child sits next to every day, who's noisy and boisterous, versus the other kid who sits next to a quiet kid? There's a lot of things, and there's data that point to this on identical twins that show that even identical twins in the same classroom don't experience the classroom the same way. They have significant differences in how they experience the same exact teacher, the same exact classroom. So there's a lot of factors that go into that. So I think the teacher level gains, clearly I think our data show that as defined like that, teacher quality is important. It moderates the genetic influence. That's a pretty big deal. But there's genetic influence, which is a big deal. And so that's part of the equation too. Kids are coming into the classroom with differences in a lot of things, including, biology.
All right, so what...
Can we ask questions?
Yeah.
No, you may not.
This is when I lose control of the panel. Yes.
I'm just curious because
yes.
I remember reading something this summer about some evaluation system they were doing in Los Angeles, and one of the factors in that supported their evaluation system was it was done over a period of time. Would the same issues apply? I mean, can you discern any more from a longer period of time? I mean, because you're going to have the variables but if you take one classroom, obviously I can see where genetics might override or other factors. But if you look at the performance of that particular teacher over a period of time, doesn't it make sense that you can determine something about them with the kind of performance evaluations we're talking about?
I was at that panel and they looked at this kind of data. I think they had more information though in terms of in their value added. I'm not sure what the school level data in Los Angeles had that Jason had reported on. I don't know, maybe. No. But I think with longitudinal data, you've got more data points. And so our teacher value added score was based on 3 data points within the same school year. Okay, so that's kind of what we're talking about. Have you made classroom level gains in 1 year? Have you gotten your second grade kid to, gain? And so we've done that. And I think, to get more to your point, my understanding of what some of the newer literature is saying also is it really depends over time what you have, exactly. So if a teacher's performing well at a number of years, that's more helpful. A child getting effective instruction over several years is key. If the child's getting passed along and isn't doing well, and then they end up with a good teacher, how much gain can that teacher do in this metric, where you've only got this 1 year of gains, if the student comes in so far behind everybody else? He or she would have to be a miracle worker, perhaps, to get that child, or the parent would have to kick in. There'd be a lot of resources on those kids that are already behind. If they've got effective teachers from the beginning, then, frankly, the gains might be smaller per year. That's what the data might tell us. So if we're making benchmarks of you must make your child, the classroom gain this much, Well, if we improve the quality overall from the beginning, like pre-K, which is in Florida, if we get good pre-K and they're starting out with good skills and they come in, that's going to influence how much gain can be achieved just developmentally in a child over a certain amount of time. So I think all those things start to shift as you start to improve the quality. And whatever benchmarks you put in place at the beginning of the legislation may or may not be appropriate once the quality of the education system improves, because there are going to be some ceilings that you're going to hit developmentally with kids that
All right,
once
so
it's all
I'll get Mike in here,
changed.
but okay, so I'm just still trying to make sure that I understand this, and we have, so the idea is a lot of these models assume, in some respects, that kids are interchangeable, and that because you're holding for their previous achievement, if the policy is, okay, we think a good teacher is one that makes 1.2 years of gains on average for their kids, you know, then if you have kids that are starting out 2 grade levels behind, as long as they make 1.2 years of gains, then you've hit the mark. What you're saying is that those kids, their own, whatever they bring with them, may make it more or less likely that they will be able to make that 1.2 years of gain.
Right, there are going to be kids who, and you know, that are perhaps going to have a moderate or a mediocre teacher, an average teacher, whatever it is, but might do really well despite that. Why does that happen? Well, again, if you think about these data, it's going to suggest, because kids are bringing something else to the classroom. Maybe their mom read to them. Maybe their parents do more with them at home. So they're going to overcome a shoddier teacher. But then you think about the kids who don't have those advantages, that they're going to need that high-quality teacher a little bit more. So yeah, the things that students bring to the classroom are, I think, going to have a big effect, and some aren't modifiable by schools.
Okay, Mike.
So I'm actually quite encouraged by this. I think that there is not significant contradiction in the two theses. I think what you have here is, I mean, it says here, high-quality teachers let genetic influence bloom, and low-quality teachers constrict that influence, right? So what you're saying is high-quality teachers essentially uncap a children's capacity in a way that they then flourish and reach their potential. Ineffective teachers restrict that in significant ways, which is, I mean, put another way, it would be okay if we believe that performance in some way mapped genetics, right? What we're fighting against is the trend that performance actually maps demographics, right? Right now, what I can tell you is that I can tell you the performance with incredible accuracy of almost any kid in this country with 3 variables: their race, their income, and their zip code. Right? What we know, unless we go far down the eugenics argument, is that those things do not map genetics, right? If I remember biology, those actually, 2 of the 3 of those categories would be Lamarckian, right? They're acquired traits. Income and zip code are acquired traits. They can't be genetic. And so if what we're saying is more effective teachers are actually needed to help kids reach their genetic potential, that's absolutely right. So what we're looking for are the great teachers that help you get from 20% of their genetic potential to 80 or 90 or 100%. No one's going to disagree that genetics have an influence on ultimate student performance. But we all deeply believe that what we know, because you see it in schools all around the country, is you can have 2 schools 50 yards away from each other with the same population of kids coming in from the same zip code with the same income and the same demographics with wildly disproportionate performance. That is not an argument about genetics. That's an argument about effective instruction and effective practice that unleashes the latent genetics. So I think it's actually a good thing.
Okay, well said. Whew, I was going to transition now from science to political science. It looks like Mike is a master of both. Nicely done. You've been waiting for Superman. He is here. I also keep thinking, don't you think I realize the 2 senators, don't you think that maybe they were separated at birth? That we have got some identical twins right here, too? I'm on a roll here, Senator. I can't help myself.
I didn't know Mike was a Democrat. I really didn't. And he probably didn't know I was chairman of the Republican Party of Florida.
So see, kumbaya is possible after all. This is great. All right, let's get back to politics for a little bit, and then we're going to open it up to your questions and comments. So, Mike, tell us a little bit. I know you could go on for a long time, but tell us sort of the highlights of this story. How on earth did you get this thing passed, particularly when you're talking about Democratic majorities in both houses?
And a Democratic governor.
Okay. Explain the miracle that you caused to happen.
Well, I think that, I mean, and this is why, it obviously is state by state, but this is why I think there is cause for some kumbaya in Colorado, because the reason, I think there are 4 big reasons I'll talk about very quickly. One is leadership, and those folks are sitting in the room. The other is coalition building. The other is messaging, and the 4th is advocacy. But I think the first and most important part here is shared leadership. So Senator Spence, who's my co-sponsor, is a Republican. So we had a Republican and Democratic sponsor in the Senate. Christine Scanlon did just come in somewhere in the back. Where are you? There's Representative Scanlon, who's our Democratic sponsor in the House, and we had a Republican co-sponsor in the House. So we had bipartisan sponsors in both chambers, and we had in the Senate we had 100% Republican votes in both chambers, which is thanks to Senator Spence's leadership, incredible there. And we had 2/3 of the Democrats who voted for it in the Senate, and Christine Scanlon had to fight to get about 8 Democrats on board in the House. Much tougher battle there. I think what was incredible about our leadership was with Senator Spence's work. I mean, we not only had Republicans and Democrats working together to both vote on the bill. It wasn't a matter of sort of holding our noses and voting together. Actually, we did strategy together, we did communications together, we did press conferences together. It really was, and I'd say to Senator Spence's credit and the Republican Party's credit in our state, I mean, there were a lot of opportunities where you all could have seized the chance to really win political points by sort of calling out all of our own political infighting in our party, but instead Senator Spence really was committed to making sure we got the right policy done, and so I think that's a credit to the Republican leadership in our state. Yeah, absolutely deserves a round of applause. So I think that was a huge help. I think on the coalition, we worked really hard to build a very deep and broad coalition. Also, cause for happiness is the AFT publicly supported our bill. Randy Weingarten, on her own volition, called the Denver Post and gave a quote to the Denver Post saying, "Here's why we support it." The AFT in Colorado is very supportive of reform, and they were great. But we had a coalition that included almost every chamber of commerce across the state. We had Stand for Children was a great partner of ours, and they helped organize a statewide coalition that included everything from the civil rights community. We had the NAACP and La Raza. We had chambers of commerce. We had our school board unanimously, our state board under Randy DeHoff's leadership unanimously supported it. So literally, we published the day before the big vote came out a full-page ad in the Denver Post that said, "We hope you stand with these folks who support this bill." And on that bill, on that paper, was every living governor in the state of Colorado, was our current governor, our commissioner, our unanimous support of our state board, every chamber of commerce in the city, in the state, every civil rights organization, every nonprofit group you'd ever thought of. I mean, every organization that ever loved mom and apple pie was on that piece of paper. And so I think that started to build some political momentum where folks felt like you were on the right side of history on this vote. And then on messaging, I think Senator Spence and Representative Scanlon and I, we were all, we called this the Great Teachers and Leaders Bill, and we did that for a reason, which was this was not about us believing that there were a bunch of teachers drunk at their desk in the middle of the day. It was about, we knew the power of what great teachers and great principals were, and if we could talk about what it took to unleash this power and to get more of these great folks, that's what we're after. And so I think that helped it be not a battle against teachers, but really a fight on behalf of all the great teachers who have struggled next to the person on their grade level team who they've been carrying for the whole school year. And then on advocacy, we also together with Stan's help and others, we had the resources to be able to fight back. I mean, the union ran radio. The first time they ran radio ads against the sitting Democrat, Senator Thrasher, they did run radio ads against me. But we had our own messaging. We had ads that we ran. We had calls that we made. We had people that we organized. We had lobbyists. But the difference was when you were an elected official on this bill, you might hear every day from the same one lobbyist, from the same one teachers organization that opposed it. But you're going to hear every day of the week. On Monday, you might have the president of your local chamber call you. On Tuesday, you might have the principal of your local school come in. On Wednesday, you might have a parent. Thursday, you might have a student. Friday, you might have the local head of your school board. I mean, you might have the local nonprofit. And so what you had was such a diverse coalition of people coming to you that it was hard to feel like you couldn't step up behind them. So I think those are some of the keys. But I think it really started with a broad and shared leadership strategy that included saying folks in both parties were going to commit to doing this.
And it didn't end there, right? The teachers' unions most definitely decided not to support some of the Democrats running for re-election this fall, right? Left them to their own devices. And how did you deal with that situation?
We were, I'll just tell you the facts and you can make the conclusions, but in the Senate, we passed it handily. 2/3 of the Democrats supported it. We had a very informed, I think, thoughtful deliberation in the House. It was really messy, and the Democrats filibustered against it for a while, and Democrats lost the House chamber in this election. The Democrats held the Senate chamber, only lost a single seat, and so when the Democratic Party monitored, the DLCC was monitoring 18 chambers across the country they thought would go Republican. 17 of them did. The one that didn't was our Senate chamber. And so I think the voters pretty clearly came out and said, if you're going to be a moderate and going to lead on common sense issues for the state, we'll support you. If you're not, we won't.
Right. But my one point being that there was, some of the reform groups with their PACs and 527s found ways to get money to those reform-minded Democrats.
Absolutely. So we worked, Representative Scanlon and I spent a lot of time raising money. Stand for Children, Democrats for Ed Reform were both incredible in providing support to those Democrats who did come out and support it. And one more hopeful note. I mean, yes, there was certainly union opposition. The AFT in Colorado, I mean, they revised their candidate endorsement form in Colorado, and the first question on that form is now, how did you vote on 191, or how would you have voted? For the AFT, it's now a threshold question that you support the reform to get the AFT's support. It's not a threshold question that you lose support. And so, not to say it happens everywhere, not to say that the AFT is perfect, but I mean, in Colorado, they are not just sort of passengers on the train. They're really helping lead on that one.
Remarkable. Okay, we're going to hear from Senator Thrasher, and then we'll open it up. So,
yeah, I'll be brief. I mean, just the politics. We had a governor who had, and if you followed Florida, maybe didn't, probably didn't, but we had a governor who basically switched parties, went from being a Republican to an independent during the course of his run for the United States Senate. And after the bill passed, he spent about a week or 10 days evaluating it, and I think was heavily influenced by the unions who had guaranteed him some support during for his run for the Senate, which was against Marco Rubio. You may have heard of Marco Rubio, who just became our United States Senator from Florida, and beat Governor Christ handily. But he vetoed it, in my opinion, simply for politics and for personal gain. And I've said that before. I don't mind saying it again in this room. And I was disappointed that he did that, because he had told at least 3 members of the legislature who were in the leadership and myself that he intended to sign the bill when it came to his desk. So it was vetoed. But one thing I would say to Senator Johnston, that we had I guess 22 or 3 members of the Senate vote for it. And then probably 50, high in the high 50s or 60s in the House. Not a single person that voted for what we call Senate Bill 6 lost the election this time.
That's great.
And under great opposition, I might add. I personally had an opponent in a Republican primary based on Senate Bill 6. Obviously I had an opponent in the Democrat in the general election based on Senate Bill 6. I had a lot of money spent against me, but just the last 10 days of the election, I had over $1 million in TV spent against me by the unions, by the Democratic Party in Florida to defeat me, with some trial lawyer help, I might add, who are allies of those guys. But we won. And the point I would make to any legislator out here, if you understand and you care about education and you believe in it, be bold. Don't be fearful of the electorate, because if you're right, they'll back you. And we won over, we actually in the Florida Senate increased our membership from 26 to 28. We increased the numbers in the House from, I think, in the mid-70s to 81. And every single person that voted for Senate Bill 6 won their election. So bold reform, leadership, if you have any takeaways from here, that's what it's about. And we did have the same kind of support, Senator, from the business community. It was incredible. We lost on messaging, though. I think we have a 60-day session. I'll quit right here. Yeah. We have a 60-day session. We probably weren't prepared enough for the onslaught and frankly, the lies and the distortions that the teachers union put out to create fear among the members of the union, who obviously were very concerned. They thought they were losing their jobs. They thought their pay was going to be cut 50%, on and on and on. But incredible distortion and incredible lies. But having said that, we're ready to get going again this year, and we're going to come back even stronger.
Just to add quickly to Senator Thrasher's point, I think the amazing thing is actually his call to boldness is true for both parties. And the other great thing is the Democrats, there were more than, let's see, would have been around 29 or 30 Democrats who all voted for this bill. in a year where Democrats made dramatic losses, only one of those 30 Democrats was defeated at the polls. Now, a lot of Democrats who voted against it did not survive, but I think that the great thing is whether either side of the aisle that you're on, actually turns out if you stand up and do the right thing on this, the politics seem to turn out okay.
Okay, looking forward to hearing your comments. Tell us your name and your affiliation, if you would, and make sure to ask a question. That's our one rule.
Sure.
Okay.
John Padgett, a member of Florida's State Board of Education, and my question is to both senators. I don't think I realized until this session that in Colorado, you didn't grandfather in any teacher under an old system. You changed all teachers. So I'd like to ask, how did you get that done? And Senator Thrasher, what's your plan for Florida?
Well, I mean, Senator Thrasher's proposal is more ambitious than ours in some ways, and so it's maybe equal and different set of challenges. But you're right, we didn't grandfather anybody in, and our strategy was, we thought that it was the right thing to do, and it actually helped that, we did not link the argument for this bill to race to the top, which has helped us even more now that we didn't win, because no one can come back and say maybe you should undo it or maybe you should stop it, maybe it should be contingent upon money. We said, no, it's the right policy for the state. We're going to do it. If we win or don't win, it doesn't really matter. And so I think the trade we made was that we have these 3 years to develop the system and make sure that we've built a system of assessments that are fair and evaluations that are fair. We do one pilot year statewide, and then it rolls out to all teachers in 2013. And then we have 1 extra year, so starting 2014, it will apply to all teachers that currently have tenure. 2013, it will start applying to people that earn it for the first time. 2014, you're eligible to start losing it. And so it was just one of those things that we took a stand on early that we thought was important, and we just made that a part of the package.
I think, John, to your question, it's obviously a work in progress. We just organized ourselves a week ago, from the standpoint of the new elections. We have some really great new members of the House and Senate. I'm going to be the Rules Chairman in the Senate this year, so I'm going to probably not introduce as many bills as I did last year and kind of manage the process a little bit. But rest assured, our bill will be as strong as it was last year. Our new governor, I know, believes that in what we did and said he has said on the campaign trail, he would have signed the bill as it was. So we start from there, and we'll see if there are some issues that we can fix that were problematic. If there are, we'll take a look at them. Excuse me. But we're not going to compromise principle. I promise you that.
Okay, Randy.
Randy Hoff with the Colorado State Board of Ed, and I think Mikey answered most of what I was going to ask. It was first to the messaging, and one of the messages that was used against it was this is all about CSAP and you're going to grade teachers based on state assessment, even though the bill was very clear it's a whole body of evidence, which kind of goes to Jeanette's study, and anybody that's studied value-added assessment knows that this is not an easy thing to do when you're talking about teacher effectiveness, but it can be done. And my question to you was, what are the compromises you made in the bill? And I think one of them was adding that pilot period, which, again, I think was critical to let's get this right rather than just do it quick and hope we get it right. So
okay.
Would you comment on that?
Yeah, I think that was the most important compromise, Randy, and frankly, I think you're right. I think the people that pushed for that were right. I think the people who said, and the union and others said, slow this down. And to Senator Thrasher's point, I mean, Senator Thrasher, we worked on this bill for about 7 months and still got process objections. And so I don't think that you ever cure process objections. They're just the objections people make when they can't disagree with the substance anymore. But I think that the one real good improvement we made was saying, let's take a couple of years and make sure we get this done right, as opposed to getting it done quickly, especially when you're talking about untested grades and untested subjects. And we also committed to saying, we're going to measure growth in 2nd grade art and 9th grade music. And we believe that this is about resisting actually the narrowing of the curriculum. But unless you want to get up as an art teacher and say, my content area adds no value, then why would we not measure the value that you're adding?
Jeanette, so just be clear. I mean, what advice would you give to policymakers then? I mean, are you saying, because of these reasons, we can't trust value added?
No, I don't want to say that. It's a good statistical technique. It's complicated, and I think the morning panel was I think, helpful for me to understand the approaches that are being taken in terms of other things that you might build into the model. A statistical model can accommodate a lot of factors. It gets complicated, but you just have to have the right people that know how to run them. So it's not impossible. You just have to not be overly simplistic about it. And I mean, I sort of remarked to someone this morning that when I got into studying reading, and I'm new to that too, so I'm really an outsider, but from a behavioral genetics standpoint, looking at twins, your measures are pretty good. I mean, people know how to make good achievement tests. That's not really the issue. It's, do you trust one test all the time and put a lot of your eggs in that one basket? And so I think having the input and, you know, getting of course I would say this, you know, getting a group of academics who do this and study these issues and look at not just things from an education standpoint. You know, one of the nice things, and I'll toot our horn about the Florida Center for Reading Research, it's a multidisciplinary group, and it was created that way so that it's not just education people who might have a stake that's this. It's psychologists. It's people who come at it from different viewpoints. I'm a clinical psychologist. I study psychopathology for a living. So I have a different perspective on things. And so I think bringing that and bringing different academic viewpoints to the table and statistical viewpoints to the table. Don't forget those resources in your communities. You know, every state has colleges and universities with some pretty great people who can help you work through some of these things so that getting it right, I agree with that, get it right, but you know, make sure that the models include the things that are important and not just focusing on something that's just going to be too narrow or unsatisfactory to everybody at the end of the day.
All right, great.
I know the senator introduced a couple of his colleagues. I see one of my colleagues back there, Senator Joe Negron, who incredible senator, did an incredible job last year in education policy, particularly in expanding the business tax credit for vouchers in our state. A lot of kids will go to better schools now because of Joe Negron. And I thought, is Anna Terry, is Anna Terry back there? And our new senator from Miami, who's been in the House for 6 years, Senator Anna Terry Flores, who you all saw at lunch, a passionate advocate for education reform and a Jeb Bush believer that success is never final. Both of them great colleagues, and I apologize for not recognizing you earlier. Thank you all for being here.
Next question.
Dwayne Quam, Minnesota Legislature. My question is in methodology. I was involved in a district where we did periodicity of 4 tests during the year. We needed to back out the summer effect from being a standard 3.9, and then midway through we evaluated whether we needed to reassign the student. What sort of periodicity and what's the philosophy of, you know, student, you know, adjustment, or, you know, mid-course instead of burning a whole year? And then how does that impact the evaluation of the teacher performance if you're going the next step of students first as opposed to the pure evaluation of the teacher?
I can take a shot at that, and Jeanette might want to jump in too. So there's a slight distinction between the traditional value-added models and what we do in Colorado, which is a growth model. And the growth model is critical in that what it does is compare students to other students with similar performance histories. So what you're doing is actually looking at other students who had, for the past 3 years, the same subsequent components of unsatisfactory, unsatisfactory, barely satisfactory, and so you're looking at the same trajectory, and then the growth model splits from there. And so you're able to look a little more closely at what is the range of growth that this student has seen from year to year. So that is still right now, it's a one-time period. It is a May of 2009 to May of 2010 assessment. Our great hope, and I'm not sure if you guys are in the PARC Consortium or one of the Common Assessment Consortiums. Are you all in Minnesota?
No, this was a special thing we happened to partner with.
Okay. So for people that are in the PARC Consortium, we're following Florida's lead and others on this, is that the promise of that model as it's currently thought out is that you have the ability to combine let's call them interim or formative assessments with summative assessments. So rather than one data point in March, they're actually looking at 3 or 4 much shorter assessment windows throughout the year, which gives you the chance both to respond to student need right away and change practice or change support in October, right? What I always say is, like, when you take an assessment in March right now and get the results back in August, that's not a diagnosis, that's an autopsy, right? That's, here's what you can't fix. And so the benefit is you both have multiple data points. You have more regular feedback that teachers and students can use to improve their practice. And then you have the ability to get more reliable measures because you've had those more steady stream of data over time. It also allows you to do more of the critical thinking components like the AP does, where you have more open-ended response, longer writing, et cetera. You could take those in the January installment, have them back by May, which means you get the full sum of data back by May in time for it to matter on student report cards, so now students have some skin in the game, and in time for you to meet the human resources timeline for us to actually inform teacher evaluation and principal evaluation.
Okay, great. Next question.
Thank you. Senator Jane Cunningham from Missouri. The two senators, I wanted to know where the merit pay or performance pay compensation comes from, either from the local district or from the state. And then, Dr. Taylor, your interaction with each other was really interesting. And I'm kind of following Mike's question. If you put a legislative hat on, what would you put in the bill with regard to merit pay, especially as it interacts with genes?
Yeah, so I'll go first, just because when our study was published in Science, although somebody at lunch told me if it had gone to the LA Times, maybe people would have read it, but Science is a good journal, and Senate Bill 6 was working its way through, and I have to tell you, I was really afraid I'd get those kind of questions, and the reason is I don't want to look like I'm dodging it. Our data don't address that. They really don't, and it's important for a scientist not to try to extend beyond. So from a data standpoint, I don't want to give an answer that people would think, oh, she's supporting that with her data, because they have nothing to do with pay. They have to do with teacher value added based on these scores. So setting that aside and just putting an opinion out instead, since I think that's what you're asking for, is I think that tying a teacher's performance and having accountability, our data are not inconsistent with that. That's not a bad thing, because we're showing that teachers matter, so they have an influence. I didn't get to talk about all of the data that we had in the study, because I was given 7 minutes. Academics are used to having, 12. And so if you'd given me my 12 minutes, I'd have added that.
You have to do more with less these days, I'm sorry.
Don't get me started on that. So we also have some analyses showing that what the direct effect of this teacher value added score is, and how we did that just briefly is because we're, again, using twins, you've got identical twins who share all their genes. So they're a control for each other on all the genetics. There's no differences between them on genetics. So we had sets of twins who one was a high performer and one was a low performer. So they're identical genetically, but one's above the mean on their reading scores, the other one's below. Those are discordant. And so when you look at an environmental factor like the teacher value added score, if you see a significant difference in those twin groups, that's a direct influence of environment. And we did find that. So again, we showed in our paper that teachers do matter. But in the analysis that we did, it'll tell us how much variance was accounted for. How much? 5%. So teachers are important, but they're not accounting for 90% of the differences between kids. Remember, 68% is genetics. What's left can be accounted for by environment, teacher's environment. They're an environmental variable. So this is how I think about the world. This is how I come into it. So if I were a legislator, I think I would try to make sure, again, that I had the really top flight scholars on these issues at the table at some level, at some point, giving me the input so that it's understood that how do we get the factors that are important? And I didn't even touch on other factors that was in my first list, things like personality and psychopathology and things that are just part of who a kid is and makes them great and makes them fun, but also makes them challenging sometimes to learn. Doesn't mean they can't learn, but some kids are going to have some difficulties that stem from these things. And that's, by the way, where those genetics come in. It's not about genes for reading. I don't want to give that impression. It's about genes that go into a lot of things that have to do with how we learn, processing speed, synapse firing, any number of things that we could talk about. So I would just want to get the right people at the table. And so teacher pay tied to performance, if it's a really comprehensive model of teacher performance, I think that makes more sense, because that's a more balanced approach than our very simple metric of just basing it on achievement scores, even if you've got good scales.
Excellent. Okay, let's hear real quickly from the senators. Where does the merit pay money come from?
The only thing harder than giving 7 minutes to an academic is giving 7 minutes to a senator. So our compensation comes from the state level, not from the district, and that's designed so that districts can keep doing whatever local pay-for-performance systems they want to, and ours just layers on top of that. And ours is based on the combination of metrics of both student data and observational and qualitative data, so it's a both and.
The state pay for it.
Okay. Last question here.
Okay, I'm Representative Rand Kelsch from North Dakota, and I'm just going to give you a little lay of the land so that you know where I'm going with in this question. We have a Commission on Education Improvement that came out of an equity lawsuit, and this commission now has become the catalyst for education reform in North Dakota. And on the commission are legislators, special interest groups, you know, the School Boards Association, the Education Association, the Council of Education Leaders, you know, our Department of Public Instruction head, as well as superintendents, you know, the interested parties. And during this last interim, because North Dakota only meets every other year, during this last interim, we were putting together our package to move forward for the next legislative session. And when we saw what the 4 pillars were going to be for Race to the Top, we said, okay, you need to come up with some sort of teacher effectiveness, performance pay plan. The chairman of the subcommittee that took on this task was the head of the North Dakota Education Association. Also, the School Boards Association was represented, as well as the Council of Education Leaders. It took them 18 months, but they came forward with a proposal to the full commission. Well, they had a consensus, and by the time it got to the full commission, the Council of Education Leaders, our superintendents in our state, had started pulling away from the proposal. We have an appropriation in there. It was going to start out start out small. Hate to call it a pilot project, but it is a project for change, and it's meeting now with resistance from the superintendents. Wondering if this happened in, you know, either of your circumstances. This is not turning out to be a political, you know, anything political. We had all 3 on board. What I believe it is, and what the superintendents are saying is, we want that money to go for per student payments, rather than going to the teachers. And I also think it's laziness on the part of the superintendents, that they really don't want to go through this whole evaluation process and you know, making the changes in their schools. So I'm kind of caught between a rock and a hard place, because I think we're going to, you know, really try to push this through. But it's difficult when you have the superintendents coming in and saying, whoa, and you've got school boards and teachers over here saying, hey, we're good to go.
Okay, quick thoughts on that?
Superintendents, some of ours were helpful, some of them weren't. You know, I mean, it's a fact of life, and some of them are influenced by the unions in their local areas, and some of them are less influenced by that. And so I think it comes down to your willingness and your political will to make a difference and to bring them into the table and try to get it done. But I don't think you're ever going to get total consensus in it. You know, one of the do you have Race to the Top? Did you get Race to the Top?
No, we didn't apply because we didn't have the two of the pillars.
Yeah.
We disagreed.
Well, I think that's helpful, you know, for us. I mean, a lot of our counties have supported Race to the Top, and now they're going to be laboratories for doing some of these things that I think the superintendents are going to have to go along with.
I would just agree with Senator Thrasher. I mean, I was a high school principal for 6 years, so I can indict myself. But I think that you know, there are more than one resistant status quo organization in education reform world, right? I mean, you can talk about institutions of higher ed are also not always the easiest partners on some things. But yeah, the superintendents groups and the principals groups were a challenge for us, because this is still a dramatic change to how they're evaluated and how they do business. Well, I agree with Senator Thrasher that what worked a lot for us was to pull individual principals, individual superintendents who were vocally in favor of it, and essentially begin to apply pressure on the organizations back through their own members. So to be able to say, listen, we know that they're great practitioners. Some of the marquee superintendents from around the state are going to come and testify in favor of this. And so it's going to be hard for you as a principals or a superintendent's organization to say you oppose it. And so, but they were a very important, to be honest, they were a very important coalition member to keep on board, because then I think the risk is if you lose the teachers and you lose the principals and you lose the superintendents, then people can say all of the educators think this is a bad idea, this is a bunch of crazy business folks don't know what they're doing. And so it was very important to us to keep the school boards and the superintendents and the principals on board. That was why we made the compromise on dropping the principals' data from 67% to 50%, because it was important to keep them.
All right, excellent. Well, please join me in thanking our excellent panel.